A few centuries? Are you serious?
Lin Yi's face went pale, his jaw dropping in pure disbelief.
Wait, if she's been around that long, what era are we even talking about? The Qing? The Ming? How far back does this go? Were those things already prowling the world even then?
A heavy silence fell over the survivors. They stared at Hua, trying to reconcile her youthful appearance with the weight of centuries. If her words were true, she was a living relic of a forgotten age. She stood there, as delicate and fresh-faced as Chu Yun. There wasn't a single wrinkle, no sign of the passage of time on her skin. The discrepancy was haunting.
What? I have to know. Just how many years have you actually seen?
The question escaped Lin Yi's lips before he could stop it, driven by a raw, gnawing curiosity.
Lin Yi, you can't just ask a girl that. It's insensitive.
Chu Yun's voice cut in, sharp with a mix of embarrassment and protective instinct.
It doesn't bother me.
Hua gave a slight dismissive shake of her head. The human concept of vanity seemed entirely foreign to her.
Time doesn't measure my existence the way it does yours. Years are irrelevant. In the language of my kind, I have reached what you might call my flowering phase. I have passed through the sprouting and the seeding. Now, I bloom. Beyond this comes the time of pollination, and then the final stage of growth. But pollination is a shared act, and so far, I am alone. Finding another like me, it seems unlikely. I may linger in this wait for a very long time, and if I never find another, I will simply skip ahead to the end, the decay.
Their life cycles were alien, a botanical progression that ignored the steady ticking of a human clock. There was no childhood, no middle age, only stages of biological readiness. Each species followed its own internal rhythm. Some might burn out in a season, while others endured through the ages. Hua was different from the predatory mantis wolves. She was a sentient flora, a creature of patience and deep roots. Even among the monsters, she was an anomaly of longevity. Zhang Cheng stood apart from the group, his brow furrowed. He tugged at his chin, his mind visibly racing through a complex web of theories. It wasn't Hua's words that unsettled him, but the way she had fought. There was a jarring familiarity in her movements. He replayed the battle in his head, dissecting every strike and parry, the fluidity, the economy of motion. They were echoes of contemporary martial arts, not the primitive brawling of antiquity. The timeline was wrong. The past she described was not the history written in their textbooks. It was something else. His eyes scanned their makeshift campsite, landing on the debris of their recent struggle. He gestured toward the discarded shotgun lying in the dirt.
Wah, back then, centuries ago, did people use tools like this to kill?
Guns? In the Ming Dynasty? That doesn't make any sense, Zhang Cheng.
Lin Yi's gaze followed the finger, his expression one of total confusion.
Actually, the later dynasties did have gunpowder weapons, but nothing like that.
Lin Yi caught the intensity in Zhang Cheng's eyes. He knew his friend wasn't just rambling. He gave Lin Yi a sharp look, silencing him. Hua's gaze drifted to the high-tech firearm.
Yes, I have seen them.
Zhang Cheng's face hardened. He reached into his pack and produced the crystalline energy vessel.
And this source of power? Was it also part of your world hundreds of years ago?
Hua's eyes locked onto the glowing crystal, then flickered momentarily toward the heavy metal gauntlet discarded nearby.
Yes, the form was not exactly as this, but the essence, the look of it, it is familiar.
There it is, the piece that fits.
A sharp, triumphant grin spread across Zhang Cheng's face, though his eyes remained cold with the weight of the implication.
I don't get it. What are you saying, that people back then were carrying around high-tech gear?
Lin Yi looked from Zhang Cheng to the shotgun, his mind failing to bridge the gap between his childhood history and this present horror.
It's not about what they had. It's about when they had it. our understanding of time. It's broken.
Lin Yi watched them, the pieces of the puzzle clicking together in his own mind. He finally saw the picture Zhang Cheng was painting.
A mismatch. You mean history isn't what we thought?
And Cheng Dao's weathered face twisted into a scowl of concentration. Then, slowly, his eyes widened as the horror of the implications set in.
Are you telling me that if we stepped back through time, we wouldn't find the emperors and the scholars we read about in books?
Precisely.
A bitter, cold resentment flickered in Zhang Cheng's eyes, a sharp contrast to the group's simple shock.
We've been living in a tiny bubble, oblivious to the vast, terrifying reality outside, like prisoners who think their cell is the entire world.
What's with the metaphors? Just tell me straight. My brain is already starting to hurt.
Lu Linhai threw up his hands, his frustration boiling over as he looked for a concrete answer.
Are you saying the books were all lies? That the history we studied was just a fairy tale?
The history is true, Lin Hai. Every war, every dynasty, it happened. But during those centuries, the monsters weren't a factor. They were buried, silent, waiting in the shadows. Humanity was allowed to live its life, to build and fall, while the predators remained asleep. It was an era of genuine, unmanipulated existence. Until the moment everything changed.
Until we got too smart for our own good. Until our technology reached the point where we finally woke them up. Recall my theory on the Great Biological Explosion. It's the key to all of this. A superior civilization once ruled this planet, but they didn't just vanish, they buried their secrets. They left behind fragments of their power, hidden in the same deep, dark places where the monsters slept.
Zhang Cheng paused, his gaze fixed on the distance as if he could see through the layers of time.
And so, while that knowledge remained buried, the history we were taught began its slow, mundane crawl. Lin Yi has it right. For thousands of years, the predators were dormant. Human technology was too primitive to disturb them, so the world remained simple, real. But progress is inevitable. Eventually, we dug too deep. We stumbled upon the monsters, and along with them, the remnants of that ancient, advanced power.
The discovery was a death sentence. Humanity tried to harness the ancient tech, but in doing so, they tripped the alarm. The monsters awoke, and a war of extinction began. We were children playing with God's tools. The original masters could have wiped the monsters out with a thought, but we were just fodder. The conflict became a grinding, centuries-long nightmare. Victory only came when we finally learned to bleed that ancient tech for all it was worth. Slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. Yet it was a hollow triumph. Even at their peak, the ancients couldn't kill the monsters. They could only put them to sleep. We, with our stolen scraps of power, were even more helpless. Desperate, humanity birthed a horrific alternative. If the enemy couldn't be killed, they had to be managed.
And that's where the Human Farm Project comes in. It's not a failure of humanity, it's a desperate, monstrous strategy for survival.
Zhang Cheng's voice was a low, chilling rasp. His eyes were devoid of any hope as he uttered the project's name. It was a logical leap, a bridge built from fragments of truth and whispers of the past. But even with the pieces in place, the core of the mystery remained shrouded. Was the human farm a desperate shield against annihilation, or was there a darker, more predatory purpose behind the harvest?
We're trapped in a chronological cage. When we hear centuries ago, our minds instinctively retreat to the comfort of the Tang and Ming dynasties. It's the only past we've been allowed to know. But those dynasties are ancient history, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years in the past. We've lost the scale of time. We're ghosts haunting a future we don't recognize, clinging to a past that's already turned to dust. We think we're living now, but we're just echoes of what was.
Lin Yi let out a heavy, weary sigh. The weight of his repeated lives seemed to press down on him as he looked at his friends.
There's a void in our history, a massive, echoing silence between the world we know and the world that actually exists.
Zhang Cheng gave a single clinical nod of agreement.
Hidden is too kind a word. It was purged, erased from our collective memory to keep the farm running smoothly. Or maybe it was to ensure the livestock never realized they were being raised for slaughter. Ignorance is the best fence, after all.
Exactly. Zhang Cheng hit the nail on the head. The masters aren't just hiding history, they're burying it to keep the freaks from ever knowing the truth.
Lin Yi's voice sharpened, his eyes flashing with a sudden burning heat as he spoke.
Give it enough time, centuries, millennia, and the past just vanishes. It stays hidden until even the freaks on the farm forget where they came from, until the livestock they eat is just another part of the scenery. It's just like that place.
His mind drifted back to the city where that mysterious stranger had spent his final days, a ghost of a memory that refused to fade.
Wait, if Zhang Cheng's right, then does that mean the freaks were here first? That they were the original masters of this world?
Chu Kai stood off to the side, his brow furrowed as he struggled to wrap his head around the implications.
And then some high-level civilization just showed up. They invaded, tore the world apart, and obliterated the freaks' home. After that, nature took over. Humans evolved, eventually becoming the apex predators of this new world. We tell ourselves we're just defending our home, but the truth is,
In that dark reality, the freaks weren't invading. They were merely trying to reclaim a world that had been stolen from them. The revelation left Chu Kai frozen. If the theory held, then the monsters were the ones with the moral high ground. But he was human. How could he reconcile his identity with such a bloody foundation?
Wait, even if this world was theirs first, that's not on us.
Lu Jinhai whispered, his voice shaking.
We're victims in all this too. If anyone's the villain, it's those high-level creatures who started the slaughter. They're the ones who wiped them out first. It's easy to judge, but if they hadn't invaded, we wouldn't even be here. We only exist because of that massacre. We're the ones who profited from their blood.
Maybe, but whether humanity is actually innocent in this? That's a much harder question to answer.
What's that supposed to mean? You're not saying you don't think the invaders were humans, do you?
Actually, it's more than possible.
Lin Yi met Zhang Cheng's gaze. In that single fleeting moment, a terrifying realization passed between them, unsaid but perfectly understood.
Think about the old legends. Pangu splitting the world, Nuwa crafting humanity from clay. We've always taken them as stories, but what if we missed the point? What kind of world did he really open? Maybe those myths are just echoes, metaphors. Pangu could have been the vanguard of the invasion and Nuwa the architect of the biological explosion that followed.
So the immortals from the stories, the ones who could fly and move mountains, were they real?
Chu Yun stared at them, her breath catching as the boundary between myth and reality began to blur.
It's highly likely. High-level technology would look like magic to anyone else. Flight, terraforming, deep-sea exploration, it would have been trivial for them.
What if the immortals were actually the god-chosen? With their advanced civilization and powers, they could easily have driven the original inhabitants into the shadows. They weren't gods, they were just better equipped. It's not just our myths either. Look at Noah's Ark. A massive vessel carrying the seeds of life through a global catastrophe. Sounds a lot like a colony ship, doesn't it? That could explain the sudden explosion of life on Earth.
But myths are just fiction, right? Stories we tell to make sense of the world?
Most of them are, but the ones that endure, they usually have a grain of truth buried deep inside. Think about the classic of mountains and seas, all those impossible beasts. What if they weren't monsters? What if they were just the freaks that survived the first purge? The dragons, the Killin, the so-called divine beasts the gods rode into battle. They could have been nothing more than tamed freaks, used as weapons by the invaders.
Lu Jinhai scowled, his mind racing. It sounded insane, but after everything they'd seen, the impossible was starting to feel disturbingly logical.
Look at it this way, it's about perspective. If an ancient peasant saw a jet or a smartphone, They'd call it a miracle. They'd build a temple around it. We're no different. When we saw those energy crystals, we couldn't believe our eyes either. It was just technology we didn't understand yet.
Lin Yi's thoughts turned back to the black crystal's violent eruption, a raw, terrifying force that had defied every law of physics he knew.
So, wait, does that make me the alien in this story?
Don't flatter yourself. You're not that special. You really think a high-tech civilization capable of planetary slaughter would have anything in common with a gorilla like you?
Lu Jinhai just shrugged, already used to Zhang Cheng's constant barbs. It was just background noise at this point.
But if they were that powerful, why hide? Why lock all that technology away? And why Earth? Why come here at all?
Who knows? Interstellar war is the most likely culprit. Space is a big place. There could be thousands of civilizations more advanced than that one. Maybe they lost. Maybe they were refugees, fleeing to a backwater planet to survive.
And the lock? That was probably to stay off the radar. If you don't use the tech, you don't get found.
It's all just a theory, of course, but it fits the data.
The intellectual thrill was clear in Zhang Cheng's eyes. For a moment, the horror of their situation was eclipsed by the sheer scale of the mystery. Zhang Cheng quickly smothered the excitement. Theories were a luxury they couldn't afford to get lost in right now. Knowing the truth didn't change the blood on the ground or the hunger in the shadows. It was just information. Analyzing the past was a distraction. Their time was better spent on the only thing that mattered, survival through strength. Only the strong lived long enough to demand answers. Only the survivors would ever see the end of the mystery.
Wah! We're putting our lives in your hands from here on.
Hua had stood motionless through their debate, and silent observer to their frantic attempts to parse the world's history. She had lived for centuries in this cave, a biological constant in an ever-shifting world. She had seen humanity before, but she had never cared to look closer. Questions weren't in her nature. She simply was. Despite her age, her knowledge of the why was as shallow as theirs. She knew the what, but the reason had never interested her.
These things belong to you to begin with. I am only returning them.
What? Can I ask? The person who taught you all this, where did they go?
Chu Yun had noticed it. The subtle softening in Hua's gaze whenever that mysterious teacher was mentioned. It was the only crack in her otherwise perfect indifference.
I do not know. He simply departed. There were no words, no warnings. He was there and then he was gone.
What a complete scumbag.
Lu Jinhai's outburst echoed through the cave mouth. A sudden burst of human frustration against the cold, silent history they had just uncovered. The decision was made. If they wanted to survive the trials ahead, they couldn't afford to be weak. Under Hua's detached guidance, the group began their grueling training. Days bled into nights as they pushed their bodies and minds to the limit, learning the lethal secrets Hua had gathered over her long centuries of observation. Time became a blur of sweat, blood, and the rhythmic sound of strikes against the forest floor. In what felt like a heartbeat, more than 2 months had slipped away. When they finally stopped, they were no longer the same survivors who had first entered the cave. They were sharper, colder, and ready for whatever the monsters had in store. A small silhouette circled high above in the hazy distance, its flight path cutting erratic arcs against the gray sky. The fuselage jerked and shuddered, a metal bird seemingly moments away from a fatal plunge, yet it clawed stubbornly at the air. Stationed at the forest's perimeter, Zhang Cheng's hands were tight around the remote's joysticks, his gaze locked onto the small screen with unwavering intensity.
So, how's the bird doing today?
A voice drifted from behind him, familiar and uncomfortably close. Zhang Cheng didn't need to look to know who was encroaching on his workspace.
Is it actually stable now, or is it going to belly flop into the dirt again like last Tuesday? You really shouldn't push your luck with the range. Chasing that thing down through the brush is a nightmare I'd like to avoid.
Lin Yi stepped into view, his bare chest glistening with exertion. 2 months of survival had carved his frame into something far more formidable and rugged. As he twirled a heavy steel rod with effortless precision, the scales along his spine caught the dim light once fan-like plates. They were now hardening into jagged, diamond-edged structures creeping toward his waist.
Will you stop jinxing me, just for once?
Zhang Cheng snapped the retort without lifting his eyes from the telemetry data.
The last few trials gave me exactly what I needed. I finally mapped the energy consumption required to maintain a steady hover. A few more tweaks to the power distribution, and this thing will be bulletproof. Who else but you would prioritize a drone and a heavy toolbox while running for their life? Doesn't that pack weigh you down?
Lin Yi leaned over Zhang's shoulder, squinting at the grainy video feed flickering on the controller. Zhang Cheng's brow furrowed in immediate irritation, and he shot a look of pure loathing at his companion.
Back off, will you? You're drenched in sweat and you smell like a wet gorilla.
That drone was more than a machine to him. It was a labor of love, every wire and solder joint a testament to his own ingenuity. It had been a lifeless hunk of plastic and electronics when they fled the city, further battered by the impact of the bus crash, but Zhang couldn't bear to leave it behind. Then, after weeks of wandering in this hellscape, a sudden flash of insight had changed everything. If the raw energy harvested from those crystals could supercharge shotguns and turn gauntlets into weapons of mass destruction, there was no reason it couldn't be harnessed for more delicate machinery. A fully operational drone would be an invaluable asset, a silent eye in the sky to map this nightmare landscape and sniff out threats before they arrived. While the rest of the survivors focused on hardening their bodies through brutal training, Zhang Cheng poured every ounce of his genius into the workbench. He spent hours dissecting the intricate wreckage of the shattered key, slowly integrating its energy-conductive containers into the drone's fragile chassis. By reverse engineering the energy release valves he'd seen in the shotguns, he successfully overhauled the drone's power distribution system. Through sheer obsessive persistence, the drone finally buzzed back to life, hovering steadily on its own power once more.
If I can rig some rudimentary firing mechanisms and script a new flight path, I might actually manage a remote fire platform. Hold on! If I just tilt the camera mount like this.
Zhang Cheng was lost in a low-muttered internal monologue, his fingers dancing over the drone's exposed wiring.
You should really consider spending some time on the training grounds, Zhang.
Lin Yi cut in, his voice grounded and practical. The technical jargon was clearly flying right over his head.
Pick up some basic self-defense at the very least. If something jumps you out here while you're staring at your screen, you're going to be helpless. Haha, very funny.
Zhang Cheng shot him a dry, theatrical roll of the eyes.
Success for a team comes from everyone knowing their specific function. My value is up here, not in my biceps. I'm the strategic core. I'll leave the heavy lifting and brute force to the gorillas who are built for it. And don't think for a second that a lack of combat skills means I'm an easy target.
He gave his heavy backpack a meaningful pat, a smug smirk playing on his lips.
You think I've just been playing with toys? If I decided to erase you, I have 100 different ways to make your life an absolute hell before you even got within arm's reach. Is that so? I'll believe it when I see it.
Lin Yi's expression was one of pure, unadulterated skepticism.
Anyway, where are the others? Still at it. I just wanted to see if your top-secret research was actually going anywhere.
Lin Yi tossed a glance back toward the clearing where the rest of the group was likely still sweating through their drills. In a secluded pocket of the forest, Chu Kai stood with a heavy frown, his senses strained to their absolute limit. It had been a month since his vision finally returned, and he had spent every waking moment since then pushing himself through a relentless training regimen. A sharp whistle of air cut through the silence near his ear. Reacting on pure instinct, he lunged to the side. The blade bit into the bark exactly where his head had been a fraction of a second ago. Chu Kai didn't stop. He spun, jumped, and dodged in a fluid dance of survival as more knives hissed from the shadows.
Not bad. Your reflexes are finally catching up to your senses.
And Cheng Dao emerged from the dense undergrowth, his expression unreadable as he retrieved a stray blade. A glowing thread of fate shimmered between them, binding Chu Kai's form to Lin Yi's. Lin Yi stood a few paces away, his face a mask of grim concentration, his entire body coiled like a spring. A sudden rustle in the foliage behind him triggered a lightning-fast reaction. He spun and dove into a roll. A massive obsidian-colored vine reared up from the dirt like a strike-ready serpent and lashed down with bone-breaking force. Before the first strike could even settle, a second vine whipped through the air, targeting his exposed back. Drawing on the enhanced perception shared through the fate connection, Lin Yi navigated the storm of lashes with a confident, almost predatory smile. But the forest wasn't finished. The smile vanished as dozens of vines erupted from the ground simultaneously, weaving a net of living thorns. He could feel them coming, but there was nowhere left to run. The vines coiled around his limbs, pinning him in place as a final, brutal lash descended. A searing wave of pain exploded across his back, yet Lin Yi remained standing. His teeth gritted against the agony. A nearby monster tree suddenly shuddered violently, its branches thrashing as if it had taken the blow itself. Faintly visible in the dim light, a second thread of fate pulsed with a rhythmic glow, tethering Lin Yi to the trembling, mutated trunk. After 2 months of grueling, near-death drills, Lin Yi had achieved a breakthrough, the ability to weave and sustain 2 threads of fate at once. But the true epiphany was more profound. He realized his threads weren't limited to human lives. He could bind his destiny to the ancient, predatory monster trees that watched from the shadows. By siphoning the kinetic energy of the impact through the thread, Lin Yi stood his ground, letting the monster tree absorb the bone-crushing weight of the vine's strike.
Damn it, Flower, you're hitting way too hard.
Lin Yi winced and reached back, his fingers probing the burning, sensitive area where the lash had landed.
You specifically requested an increase in force.
Flower's response was as flat and devoid of emotion as ever, her gaze fixed on him with clinical detachment.
I meant a bit more force, not a full-speed execution strike.
Humans are an incomprehensible species.
She tilted her head slightly, her voice dropping into a cool, dismissive register.
First you demand more strength, then you whine when it is delivered. There is no logic in your complaints.
A massive, gnarled monster tree groans and splinters before crashing to the forest floor, sending a cloud of ash and dry needles into the air.
Xiao Yun, are you hurt? Talk to me.
Chu Kai sprinted toward the epicenter of the blast, his face a mask of frantic, protective panic.
I'm okay, truly.
Chu Yun lowered her gaze, her posture shy and apologetic as she whispered the reassurance.
My control just slipped for a second. I didn't mean to release that much energy from the crystal.
Heavy metal gauntlets, the same lethal weapons taken from the stranger 2 months ago, were strapped to her slender forearms, still humming with a faint, residual glow.
I've said this before. You don't have to put yourself through this training. I'll be the one to keep you safe.
His voice was thick with a brother's unwavering concern, his eyes searching her for any sign of injury.
And I told you I can't just stand by. I refuse to be a weight that drags the rest of you down.
She shook her head with a quiet, stubborn resolve, her eyes reflecting a determination that mirrored her brother's. In another sector of the woods, Zhang Cheng and Lu Linhai both flinched at the sound, but their attention was immediately pulled back to the flickering console. The drone, circling high above, was transmitting a grainy, high-contrast video feed that turned their expressions from irritation to stark, cold dread.
What on earth? Zhang, what is that? What the hell is going on down there?
Lin Yi leaned in so close to the screen, his breath fogged the glass, his voice cracking with a sudden, sharp fear. The glowing monitor flickered with movement. From the deep, oppressive shadows of the tree line, a sudden surge of movement erupted. Thousands of rats began pouring out of the forest. They moved with a singular, desperate purpose, a roiling carpet of gray fur driven by a primal, instinctive dread. This wasn't a hunt, it was a mass exodus toward the unknown.
What in the world is going on?
Lin Yi's voice cracked, the words tight with a sudden, sharp shock as he stared at the screen. In the 2 months they had carved out a life here, they had seen plenty of horrors, from forest vermin to the predatory birds in the sky. But this was different. These creatures were usually hidden away during the day. For them to abandon their nests in such a massive, coordinated stampede, it was something they had never witnessed before.
Creatures like these have a sense for calamity long before we do.
Zhang Cheng's voice remained unnervingly level as his eyes tracked the movement on the screen, his mind already dissecting the patterns of their flight.
If they're fleeing with this much desperation, they've picked up the scent of something terminal. They aren't just moving, they're abandoning this entire region.
He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, the flickering light of the monitor reflecting in his narrowed eyes.
But what could be terrifying enough to turn a whole swarm into a frantic stampede like this? What kind of nightmare are they running from?
The footage revealed the rats moving with bone-snapping speed. Even when the smell of blood had drawn them to the hair-snail parasite village, they hadn't looked this haunted. This wasn't a craving for meat. This was pure, primal terror.
Is the earth about to shake? Could it be an earthquake?
Zhang Cheng glanced around their immediate surroundings. The open terrain was relatively safe from tremors, unless the ground itself was planning to open up and swallow them.
Or maybe...
He trailed off, his expression darkening as a more chilling thought took root.
Maybe there's something truly horrific closing in on us right now.
He turned sharply toward Lin Yi, his urgency finally breaking through his analytical mask.
Their behavior is completely wrong. Go find Lin Yi and the others and bring them here immediately. I'll keep the drone in the air. I want to see exactly what's chasing them before it gets here.
On it!
Lin Yi gave a quick, sharp nod before spinning around and sprinting toward the training grounds at full tilt. The rest of the group arrived in short order, their faces grim as they gathered around the small, flickering screen. As Lin Yi finished his hurried, breathless report, the air in the small room seemed to thicken, growing heavy with a suffocating sense of dread.
Zhang Cheng, give me a status update. What are we looking at?
Lin Yi stepped closer to the monitor, his eyes narrowing at the chaotic blur of gray fur that filled the feed, a relentless flood of rats rushing through the undergrowth. Zhang Cheng didn't look away from the screen, merely shaking his head slowly as his fingers danced over the drone's controls.
Nothing concrete yet. They're moving fast, and they've already covered a massive distance. I'm pushing the drone to the very edge of its signal range. If they go much further, we're going to lose the feed entirely. The interference is already starting to crawl across the edges of the display.
There are just so many of them. It's even worse than when they swarmed the village.
Chu Yun whispered the words, standing on her tiptoes and peering over Zhang Cheng's shoulder with a look of pure apprehension.
Do you think they've caught the scent of blood again? Are they hunting?
I doubt it.
Lin Yi's voice was like ice, his gaze fixed on the screen as he analyzed the creature's frantic movements.
These are nocturnal scavengers. They don't expose themselves to the sun unless they're on the absolute brink of starvation. Even hunger wouldn't drive them to move with this kind of coordination. This isn't a search for food, it's a desperate retreat.
There is nothing approaching through the earth.
Flowers spoke tonelessly. her eyes distant as if she were listening to a rhythm only she could hear. Her vines had already burrowed deep into the soil, acting as sensitive seismic needles. If the ground were preparing to buckle or shift, she would have felt the first vibrations long ago. Even her wild mantis wolves, stationed as aerial sentries, remained silent. If a predator were stalking the area, they would have shrieked a warning by now.
Maybe we should follow them? See where they're going?
Lin Yi suggested the idea tentatively, his eyes darting between Lin Yi and the monitor.
Absolutely not.
Lin Yi's rejection was firm and immediate, leaving no room for argument.
Wandering blindly into the unknown, like that is nothing short of suicide. In those numbers, those rats are lethal. If we get caught in that tide and something triggers them to turn, we'll be torn apart before we can even process what's happening.
I have survived in this nightmare for many years.
Flower's gaze was fixed on the horizon, her vines twitching rhythmically as they sensed the faint vibrations of the distant stampede.
Never in all that time have I seen them move like this. Never.
If even Flower hasn't witnessed this behavior,
Zhang Cheng's brow furrowed, his analytical mind struggling to reconcile the data with his existing knowledge of the world's horrors.
then we are facing something truly unprecedented.
His curiosity was a dangerous living thing. When faced with an enigma, his first instinct was always to peel back the layers and see what lay beneath, regardless of the risk. His eyes darted across the flickering screen, a reckless plan beginning to take shape in his mind.
Lin Yi is right. Tracking them on foot is a death sentence. We've grown stronger, yes, but this world has a brutal way of reminding you how insignificant you really are. Caution is our only real advantage here.
He fell silent, his gaze once again locked onto the relentless migrating swarm on the monitor.
In that case, the solution is simple. I'll head out on my own.
The hell you will!
Lin Yi's voice boomed, cutting across Zhang Cheng's words before Lin Yi could even think about intervening.
You aren't one of the God chosen. You don't have any powers. You haven't had a day of combat training. You've got nothing. You wouldn't last 5 minutes out there by yourself. If you step foot outside this village alone, you're as good as dead.
Watch your mouth.
Zhang Cheng snapped back, his eyes flashing with a cold, intellectual fury.
I might not have your divine gifts or your muscle-headed training, but I'm far from an idiot. I have my own methods for survival, and they've served me well so far. Besides, I said I'd be the only human going. I never said I'd be going entirely alone.
What? What's that even supposed to mean?
Lin Yi blinked, his frustration momentarily replaced by sheer confusion. Lin Yi's eyes narrowed as he studied Zhang Cheng. He recognized that look, the spark of a plan that was as brilliant as it was reckless.
Are you planning to take Flower with you?
Flower wasn't human. In Zhang Cheng's clinical logic, if she accompanied him, he would still technically be the only person on the scout mission. Zhang Cheng shook his head, his gaze shifting toward the edge of the clearing.
No, I'll take one of the wild mantis wolves.
His strategy was simple and effective: flight. By using the mantis wolves, he could track the swarm from the safety of the sky, well beyond the reach of the rats. If the situation turned dire, the rats would have no way of reaching him in the air. He would be untouchable. He intended to maintain a safe distance, utilizing the drone to scout the rat's destination while he remained safely airborne. If the drone's feed revealed anything truly threatening, he would have more than enough time to bank the creature and retreat to the village.
Fine, but I'm not letting you go off into that madness by yourself. I'm coming with you.
Lin Yi's tone was final. There was no way he was going to let Zhang Cheng vanish into the blue without backup. Zhang Cheng opened his mouth to argue, but one look at Lin Yi's set jaw told him it was a losing battle. The other man was immovable. Flower raised her hand, her vines rustling as she signaled one of the massive wild mantis wolves to descend. The creature touched down with a heavy thud, crouching low to the ground. Zhang Cheng and Lu Linhai wasted no time climbing onto its broad, armored back. With a powerful beat of its insectoid wings, the beast launched into the air, banking sharply toward the horizon where the gray tide of rats continued its relentless exodus. Lin Yi stood in the clearing, his eyes tracking their flight until they were little more than specks against the shifting clouds. A cold, gnawing unease twisted in the pit of his stomach. In this fractured world, the unusual was rarely anything but a harbinger of suffering and death. Lin Yi closed his eyes, extending a spectral thread of fate toward Chu Kai, hijacking the other man's enhanced vision to follow the monster's path through the sky. He maintained the connection with exhausting focus, watching as the mantis wolf and its riders became tiny flickering specks on the horizon before finally vanishing beyond his range.
Lin Hai is with him. I'm sure they'll be just fine.
Chu Yun spoke softly, her eyes still fixed on the empty expanse of sky where the creature had disappeared.
Worried about Zhang Cheng?
Chu Kai let out a short, dismissive snort, shaking his head at his sister's concern.
Don't bother wasting your breath. Do you honestly think he was joking back there? He hasn't been out on the field with us, but that doesn't mean the man has been sitting on his hands. I've heard the noises coming from that workshop of his, strange mechanical grinding and high-pitched whirs. He's been building things, dangerous things, things that are designed to bite back when this world tries to swallow him. If the worst really does happen, Zhang Cheng has a better chance of crawling his way back than Lu Linhai ever will.
Lin Yi turned to look at Chu Kai. Behind them, the sunset bled across the horizon, painting the sky in violent, jagged streaks of crimson and bruised orange. It was a scene of devastating beauty. But to Lin Yi, it looked like a world already engulfed in flames, a funeral pyre for the reality they had once known.
You're right about Zhang Cheng. He's not the kind of man who waits for fate to come knocking on his door. But this, whatever this thing is that's driving the forest into a panic, it's already here. It's among us.
He turned his gaze back toward the dark, jagged edge of the forest, where the very last of the rats were vanishing into the lengthening shadows. The exodus was complete, and the silence that rushed in to fill the void was heavier and louder than any scream they had ever heard.
Did that mantis wolf come back by itself?
Lin Yi's brow furrowed as he watched the solitary beast descend. A cold pit of dread formed in his stomach. Where were the others?
By itself?
And Cheng Dao's expression turned grim, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Chu Kai gave a slow, somber nod.
Lu Linhai and Zhang Cheng aren't with it. I don't see any sign of them out there either.
Do you think they're in trouble?
Chu Yun's voice wavered, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Lin Yi watched the creature's flight path with narrowed eyes, his mind racing. After a moment, he shook his head.
I don't think so. The mantis wolf isn't even scratched. If there had been a real fight, it wouldn't be returning so calmly.
Flower had specifically commanded the beast to protect them before they departed. It wouldn't have just left them behind if things had gone south, especially not without a single wound to show for it.
Maybe Brother Zhang found something interesting?
Chu Yun spoke up, a thoughtful look crossing her face.
Like that time at the parasite village when he went off on his own with Brother Lin Hai.
Zhang Cheng was always 3 steps ahead. If they'd spotted something suspicious near the rat swarm, they likely stayed to verify it. Sending the mantis wolf back made sense. Its massive frame was far too easy to spot from a distance. The thought brought a small measure of comfort to Lin Yi. Zhang Cheng wasn't the type to gamble without an ace up his sleeve. If he stayed behind, it was because he knew exactly what he was doing. He was certain he could bring Lu Linhai back in one piece.
We'll get our answers as soon as I speak with it.
Flower spoke with a quiet confidence that settled the room. Even after all this time, Lin Yi found her rapport with the freaks to be nothing short of a miracle. The mantis wolves of the wild were a different breed from the domesticated ones in the city. They could mimic sounds, but true communication was beyond them. Lin Yi had spent the last 2 months attempting to bridge that gap, hoping to teach them the basics of human speech. His efforts had been in vain. The creatures were only capable of mindless repetition. While they weren't mindless, the wild mantis wolves lacked the generations of human influence that had civilized their urban cousins. The city dwellers had been refined by centuries of contact, a process that couldn't be replicated in a matter of weeks. Flower, however, was something else entirely, a sentient freak of the highest order Lin Yi suspected. Her perception was far more intimate than Chu Kai's. She didn't just sense movement, she sensed the soul. Fear, malice, caution, none of it could be hidden from her emotional radar. This profound empathy, combined with years of living alongside the beasts, gave her a connection to them that defied logic. Chu Kai's face contorted as the mantis wolf drew near. He'd spotted a deformity that shouldn't have been there.
Lin Yi, look, something's wrong with that thing.
Chu Kai's tone was icy. He gave Lin Yi a sharp nudge and pointed at the approaching monster. Lin Yi's eyes darted upward. He scanned the beast for several long seconds, but at first glance, everything seemed normal. Its thick shell was intact, its wings pulsed steadily, and all its limbs were accounted for. It looked like any other mantis wolf in flight, its claws tucked and its feelers pulled back. But then, the details began to resolve. As Lin Yi focused on the creature's head, his heart skipped a beat.
Brother? What is it? What do you see?
Chu Yun's voice was filled with a mixture of curiosity and growing dread.
Is it injured? Did it get hurt out there?
Those eyes, the mantis wolf's eyes.
A wave of revulsion washed over Lin Yi, making his skin crawl.
They're covered in some kind of meat sprouts?
Meat sprouts?
And Chengdao squinted at the sky, though from this distance, the finer details were still a blur to him.
Why would something like that be growing on its eyes?
Thick bundles of what looked like raw, pulsating muscle protruded from the creature's facets like jagged hooks. They were a sickening shade of bruised crimson. It wasn't until the monster began its final descent that the true scale of the horror became visible. The tiny, thread-like growths writhed and twitched, as if they were living parasites trying to eat their way out of the beast's skull. It was a sight that turned the stomach. In all his time with these creatures, Lin Yi had never seen anything even remotely like this. This wasn't natural. It had happened after it left with Zhang Cheng and Lu Linhai. A sudden, biting cold settled in his chest. If even a monster could be ravaged by this infection, what chance did Zhang Cheng and Lu Linhai have? He forced himself to stop, unable to bear the weight of that conclusion.
Can it even see through that mess?
Chu Kai spoke up, his practical mind already analyzing the creature's sensory capabilities.
How is it even flying with that filth obscuring its vision?
The truth was revealed in an instant. The creature was completely blind. It soared right over Lin Yi's group, oblivious to Flower or anyone else on the ground. Flower didn't hesitate. A thick, thorny vine burst from her arm, snapping through the air like a lash. It coiled around the beast, and with a brutal yank, she slammed the monster into the dirt. The impact did nothing to quell its rage. The beast was frantic, its mind seemingly gone. Not even Flower's presence could reach it now. Its underbelly tentacles whipped out in a blind frenzy, slicing through the air with serrated edges. The tooth-lined suckers clamped onto the binding vine, tearing into the plant matter with animalistic hunger. As it bit down, the crimson growths on its eyes pulsed and writhed with renewed vigor.
Hold on. Those things, they aren't just growths. They're...
Chu Kai's senses had been honed by years of survival. his perception far more acute than Lin Yi's developing eyes. He could see the microscopic reality hidden beneath the carnage.
It's a fungus, a living mold.
Fungus? You're kidding.
Lin Yi's brow knit together in confusion. He looked back at the struggling beast and watched in horror as the bite marks on Flower's vine began to sprout their own crimson filaments.
Is it spreading? Is that thing contagious?
Worse, it's airborne. It's releasing spores right now.
Chu Kai's voice cracked with urgency as he screamed at Flower.
Flower, drop it. Get away from it now. The spores are moving too fast. If you don't break the connection, you're next.
Flower didn't waste a second. Without even turning her head, she threw her weight back and severed the vine with a sharp, decisive snap.